Good morning, my name is Frances Shannon. I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Research here at the University of Canberra. I'm replacing Professor Stephen Parker, who is travelling overseas on behalf of the university. Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning.
The government has now extended its probe into union corruption. How much of this is a political move?
Well, I think quite a bit of it is political because obviously the extension is for a year. That will put the results much closer to the election, and the results won't be good for the union movement, and also of course that has fallout for the Labor Party. However, it is also true that the Royal Commissioner said that there was a lot more to be done. Essentially, that was the message of his letter to the government. He said he wasn't asking for an extension and he wasn't asking for wider terms of reference, but the whole thrust of the letter was that there were further things to probe, and by the way, the terms of reference weren't as wide as perhaps were necessary, and he gave another draft term of reference. So he was clearly looking for more time, and that fitted in very well with the government's agenda.
And has the term of reference been extended?
Yes, he's got another year, and he has had the term of reference included, a new one.
I guess we'll have to wait for a while for the outcome of that then.
Well, there is going to be an interim report at the end of this year, and of particular interest with that will be whether he finalises what he has to say about Julia Gillard's role in the AWU slush fund, all that period ago when she was an industrial lawyer. So there will be a lot of attention, I think, on this first report.
Now to a more global issue, Michelle, and our involvement in the Middle East. Australia has started bombing in the war against ISIL. Is this participation going to have public support?
I think it will, at least in the initial phase, because Australia is acting as part of a coalition. We have only limited forces involved, the Super Hornets, and we will have special forces acting as advisors to the Iraqi military forces, and also the government has couched it very much as a humanitarian operation to help against insurgents who've been committing atrocities. Now, it's obviously not just a humanitarian operation. It is a war, even though the government won't call it a war, but it is limited from our point of view. Now, if things changed, if, for example, we went into Syria, which we've said we wouldn't, and therefore bipartisan support was broken, which would be likely in those circumstances, or if we ended up with so-called boots on the ground combat forces, then I think public support would fall away. But again, Tony Abbott has said that that won't happen, and the Obama government doesn't intend, certainly at this point, to go down the boots on the ground road. So at the moment, I think it will have substantial public backing.
Joe Hockey has called on Labor to pass budget measures so they can pay for this war effort, although you say it's not being called a war, but the Prime Minister appears not to support this approach. Where is this going? What does this tactic have any value?
I think it was a misstep by Joe Hockey that Tony Abbott knows it's important that this does stay bipartisan, and that means you don't score cheap political points off your opponent. Tony Abbott was very anxious to separate Labor's attitude on the budget to the whole conflict issue, and of course while he's critical of Labor and the budget, he's not making that linkage, and by making the linkage, Joe Hockey simply risked the bipartisanship to some extent, but also enabled Bill Shorten to have a shot at the government and at Hockey and put a bit of pressure on Abbott.
So probably not a good move.
Not a good move, and also adds to the criticism that many people within the coalition have been making about Joe Hockey, who's not had a great year.
The expanded terror laws continue to be controversial. Is this a serious problem? Are there serious issues with this, or is it a fringe issue?
I think in terms of the public's point of view, they are probably not too worried about this at this point anyway, because they feel that there is a danger and the government's addressing it. But the laws, both the one that's gone through and the one that's before Parliament at the moment, and also the one that's coming, which is for the storage of metadata, which the public probably will be more agitated about because it goes to personal communications. All those have raised concerns in certain circles, people concerned with privacy, the media, and I think that the controversy about them will just become greater rather than less. The Muslim community is agitated about some aspects, and of course this whole notion of banning particular areas for people to travel to is a difficult and controversial one, particularly difficult to administer though.
Are they useful, do you think?
I think in general it's fair enough to update ASIO's powers to cope with modern communications, because one of the problems is that the legislation is very specific, so that when technology moves on, the security agencies in a way fall behind because they don't have the particular updated powers they need. So that's fair enough, but other aspects I think are intrusive and potentially would stop proper reporting of ASIO operations, for example, that went wrong. They are quite draconian in that regard. Now, ASIO would say, well, this is only to give officers reasonable protection if they're, for example, embedded in some group that commits acts against the law, they need immunity. But the way that the legislation's written, it is very broad. It could be abused. It could be used to cover up bungles, and that's what the media is worried about.
Okay, thank you very much, Michelle.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you.